Today, I'm excited to welcome Mary Ruddick to the show, who is a certified nutritionist and has a pretty crazy background of how she got into health. She was super sick and went through, I think, 10 years of trying a bunch of different diets, figuring out what worked for her. And since then has started her own practice, but primarily spends her time traveling around the world, looking into indigenous and native cultures to figure out how they're eating and how they can apply to her patients. So super interesting background here. And something I haven't spoke much about, but Mary and I are going to Africa in February. So we are going with Paul Saladino and Brian Sanders, two guests who have been on the show before. And we're going to get a little sample of how she spends time with some of these cultures to sort of soak in some of the ancestral knowledge that we've lost along the way. So we're going to be going to Tanzania and checking out some of the tribes there, Maasai, Hadza, a couple other ones. And I am very excited. So we talk a little bit about that and how we are going to approach that trip. So a lot of information packed into this one. Tune in and I hope you guys enjoy. This episode is brought to you by Element, or LMNT, which is an electrolyte beverage brand founded by Rob Wolf, Luis Villasenor, and Tyler Cartwright. 2 of 3 of those guys have actually been on the show to talk about why they started this company and their background in this space. But mainly they have worked with literally thousands of people. And these are some of the most qualified experts that I learned a lot from in the early days of when I was doing keto and helping research and help a lot of people. And the number one thing that these guys saw was that people were having an extremely hard time switching to low carb because they were simply not getting enough electrolytes. But as you guys know, I often complain about the supplement industry is full of absolute trash, that people using artificial ingredients, fillers, sugar, etc. And they could not find an electrolyte that met their standards, not only from lack of ingredients, but not having the highest amount of sodium, potassium, and magnesium that they thought needed to exist in certain ratios. So they launched Element, and I drink them myself daily. So I've been a long time user basically since the first day they launched. And whenever I go back to eating keto or lower carb after eating a moderate amount of carbs, I need these things at least a couple times a day, or else I feel like crap, especially in the summertime here in Austin, Texas, where it's 150 degrees every single day. And I'm working out outside, playing basketball, hanging out with friends, and sweating my face off. I typically have up to 4 of these in a day. My favorite is the citrus salt, which is the original one, but the raspberry and habanero are also my favorites as well. So if you guys want to hear more about Element and my favorites and why I use it, head on over to drinklmnt.com/TNSP. That's drinklmnt.com/TNSP. Mary, thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I was excited to get you on the podcast just because you seem to be living my dream life. So selfishly, I just want to live vicariously through you. We were chatting a little bit before the show started about sort of your last year, obviously with COVID has been wild, but sort of, maybe just go into a little bit around how you spend your time, where you live, and sort of how that all is set up right now.
Sure. So I live in Greece now. I'm in Athens, Greece, and I've been based here for some time. But for the last several years, I was in a new country almost every week, going around studying traditional diets, traditional food, and traditional preparation methods. When COVID hit, I had just left Sicily. I was in Sicily for about a month studying food techniques there and really learned some interesting dairy fermentation techniques and things like that. The sheep dairy there is very, very good. And then jumped on a plane, went to Dubai really quickly, and then went into Zimbabwe, where I was starting a 6-month and 10-country tour of Africa, going to about 22 different tribes. That's when it really hit. I got one of the last flights out of Italy, but it hadn't gone to the rest of the world yet. So when I hit Zimbabwe, that was when it really hit, and kind of everything shut down very quickly, mainly because in Zimbabwe, there's no medical backbone there. The hospitals, they have very few beds, they don't have ventilators and those kind of things. And so they really just kind of shut everyone down into the houses.
Wow. And then from there, so just the overall, I guess, exploration is just an indefinite learning in different cultures. And would you say an ancestral way, or just cultures that have not been
Very ancestral, and it really came from, I grew up in an American family with French heritage, and so we ate a very French style diet, I would say. But when I was from age 20 until 18 until 30, I was fully disabled with an illness, and it really changed everything about how I looked at food. I thought I ate very healthfully. I ate healthier than my friends, and ended up going into remission through a really crazy strict diet. And from that, it was very insightful. I spent a lot of those years that I was in bed sick researching traditional diets. And it opened my eyes up, because I thought for so long, as so many of us do, that I was doing the right thing, eating all these salads and these kind of things, and oatmeal for breakfast. And it was a very humbling experience to realize, wow, if these people, say in Tanzania or in Kenya or in Papua New Guinea, are eating everything that I'm told not to eat, and yet they're in perfect health, something is wrong. And so it opened me up in a very humbling way to try new things. And that ultimately led to my own personal healing. And that was eye-opening. So when I healed and went back to school, I studied nutrition and then opened up practice and started working with people. And I've been doing that for many, many years now. But that kind of fire inside for learning about traditional cultures, traditional diets, and how I'm personally really fascinated how healthy people can be on different diets. So you look at someone like the Maasai or the Samburu versus, say, the Hadza, very different diets there, and yet both are in perfect health. And I think that tells us a lot about what we need as humans and what we can get by on. And that kind of goes across the whole world. I've been trying to do as much of the varied diets as possible to really pull out the interesting little tidbits from each, and also dispel some of the myths that I had fallen for when I was sick, as so many of us do, like the blue zones and that kind of thing. And that's why this summer I spent most of my time in Korea.
So 12 years being sick is not normal, obviously.
Right.
Right. What happened there? So you're 18, yes. And then your health started falling apart?
Yeah, no, it happened overnight, actually. I was kind of like an adventure seeker kid, and doing lots of adventure sports and wanting to travel a lot. And so I picked a school in the Bahamas, which is on a remote island. So don't think tourism. There wasn't tourism there. It was very remote. We were camping, studying marine biology and marine ecology. And halfway into it, I got very, very ill with an infection that went up to my brain and my nervous system. And it ended up living there for about 3 years, continuously damaging it before they caught it. So they didn't. What?
Is it a parasite or what?
It was a mycoplasma. So they're kind of a blend between a bacteria and a virus, which now are more common. So I think had I gotten it now, they would have found it. But at the time they didn't find it for 3 years. So I went from an athlete training for Ironman to overnight not being able to walk to the bathroom. It was pretty crazy. Yeah. And with that, along with that, I got something called dysautonomia, which is a dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system, which over time, you don't send blood to your organs. So I ended up with very severe kidney disease, liver disease, lung disease, and 2 autoimmune thyroid diseases. So getting to see all of that reverse through dietary and lifestyle work was really helpful and really set me up to be able to truly tell people what they actually need to do to get better. I don't know how people go, and I don't think I could have done this kind of work or worked with the kind of patients I do had I not gone through that experience.
Yeah. I mean, my guess is you went through this similar thing where your body kept shutting down, but you were feeling awful and worse. Nobody had answers for you. So you had to figure things out on your own.
Yeah. Well, honestly, the doctors told me they couldn't do anything. So we spent about 7 years. My dad's a physicist, and he's a real easygoing, funny guy. He's actually from Texas. But he took kind of more a scientific angle to it. So the first 7 years they sent me to the best of the best. They shipped me off to President Clinton's personal doctor. They spared no expense trying to get me better. But 7 years in, I was bedbound and worse than ever. I was on 17 medications, one of which was 2,000 a month. I mean, it was just really, they were great about it, but it was very clear if I was ever going to get out of this, if I wasn't dependent on my parents, I would have been homeless. I honestly don't know what I would have done. And that was a very conscious thought when I was bedbound of like, nobody's going to do this for me. Like no one's coming, no one's creating a drug, this kind of thing. And so 7 years in, when it got truly so bad, my dad and I were talking and we were like, listen, they don't have the answers. We've got to find something else. So we started doing our own research, and my mom jumped in. She's a great researcher. And started reading all these books written by doctors. And we immediately noticed the pattern that when they got ill, they didn't use their mechanisms. They knew the limits of their field. And so with chronic illness, they would go in another route. At the time, no one had healed from dysautonomia, at least on medical record. And so we just tried everything. I did diets for heart disease. I did diets for cancer. I did meditation and acupuncture, and really threw the whole kitchen sink at it. And it was really a lot of fun. It was actually a lot of fun to do all those different protocols. And it was great because as I got better, soon after I got better, 2 other people also went into remission with dysautonomia. Interestingly enough, doing completely opposite protocols that I had tried and didn't work. And so it helped me, I think it even furthered my interest in all these different diets, because it showed me that there are different routes to healing, and at different stages, different things will work for different individuals.
Yeah. I mean, it's wild that, I don't know if it's an American population type of thing, but so many people, I saw this in my clinic all the time when I was in practice, but just, I don't think they're at the point where they want to do the work yet.
Yes.
And I think it's sort of, we've set up a paradigm here where you go to a doctor, they in 5 minutes say, okay, take this medication, and the medication is supposed to solve the problem. Obviously that doesn't work very well, but yeah, I mean, like what was that threshold like for you? I mean, you talked about it a little bit, which is like, we have to do the work now. Was it a big mental shift, an emotional shift more than it was just like a practical day to day?
It was a huge shift because in the first 7 years, I should preface this by saying I was the worst personality for getting sick. I'm an extrovert. I'm constantly focused on the future and like projects and these kind of things. I'm not a homebody. And so to get sick, I basically would go to my doctors and be like, listen, what can you give me? I want to go to Africa next month. Like, what can you give me so that I can function at least half the time? And they would give me this pile of drugs, or I would be going back to school, but it never really worked. And that's something I think anyone who's dealt with chronic illness can attest to. The drugs, even the ones that help on a symptom basis, you never actually feel good. I never felt healthy during those years. And it would often like work on some days and not others. And that kind of thing. So in the beginning, I was very much like, just give me a Band-Aid. What do I need? It wasn't until my organs really started hitting more critical thresholds, and where everything just stopped working. I lost all my strength. I lost a ton of weight to where I couldn't hold a phone or a coffee cup. And so when you get to that level and you've been to hundreds of doctors and you've tried, I couldn't say how many medications and these kind of things. And each month your lab work is getting worse and you're going for infusions. You get to a point where I think you just start to realize like, this isn't, no one is solving this issue for me. It's a really wonderful place to get to. I have to say, when I came to that realization, I remember the moment. I was in the bed in my parents' house, and all of a sudden it just felt very freeing, because I wasn't, for the first time in 7-8 years, I wasn't searching, or I wasn't looking for someone else. I wasn't shifting the responsibility of healing onto someone else. And it allowed me to look at every single moment of my day and think about like, okay, if I was in nature right now, like if I was a plant, what would I be communicating to nature? Am I communicating that I'm in this frequency of illness, that I want to stay sick? Or is there something I can do to communicate that I'm healing and I want to be here and I want to stay here and I want to thrive? And I found a lot of my mentality and my actions were those of a sick person at that point. And so I just started shifting it from bed, from everything I was thinking about to everything I was saying. And it brightened up my world in a way I don't know if I could explain with words. But that second year of being bedbound and housebound was honestly one of the best of my entire life. And I was still just as sick as the first year. And it went on for a couple more years after that. But there's something incredibly powerful when we take responsibility for literally everything in our lives and stop looking to someone else, stop looking for a key or some missing information or for the next test, and instead start making action in this moment.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a mindset shift. And I think that many people just don't understand how much your world is shaped by the beliefs you have.
Completely.
And
Yeah, I actually think it's imperative. Hmm?
Yeah. So, I mean, is this a big thing that you work with people now, is just, fundamentally changing their mindset rather than making any sort of modifications?
I do. Yeah. I would say it's probably in thirds. So 1/3 is diet, 1/3 is lifestyle, because so many lifestyle things affect the microbiome, from getting light to meditation, all those kinds of things, being present. And then 1/3 is the mindset. I find for most people, they'll be in the gutter for the first maybe 1 to 3 months we work together, and then they'll pop out on their own with the kind of things that I've given them and that kind of thing. The ones that continue to kind of stay in the gutter, those are really tricky patients to work with, because you can always find an excuse to be upset. You can always find an excuse to feel sorry for yourself. But it's in jumping out of that and going on to the hero's journey that you actually get healthy. You never get healthy with that kind of mindset. So yeah, that's a huge piece of what I do with my patients.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that, especially in my clinic, when I saw it, was that people need to make that decision and come to that realization on their own. And as much as you want to help people at times, it can be very frustrating. It's like, hey, here are all the answers, but if they're not ready for it on their own and don't find that on their own, like, you can seed all this information, but they sort of need to be the ones who come to that realization on their own, which is always tricky. Yeah. So you were trying all these different diets. You finally land on one then that worked, that you had a resolution in symptoms. And what did that look like?
Yeah, I did. So, it's a 12-year journey. So there's a lot we can talk about there, but different things healed at different times. Like my neuropathy healed before I had neuropathy from the neck down. That was very severe. Healed separate of diet, kind of. I had just been low carb, mildly ketogenic, and it was 2 supplements. It was alpha lipoic acid and B6 that put that into remission. But the bulk of it all healed on a ketogenic version of the GAPS intro diet, which is basically where you just eat boiled meat and soup and 0 starches to feed the bacterial overgrowth. It's a very strict diet. But the strictness was actually very nice because it was repetitive and easy. So it was actually a lot less cooking, cleaning, which is good for someone who's really sick and doesn't have a lot of energy. And on that diet, around 1 month in, my nerve tests came back as healing, which was really incredible. This is separate from the neuropathy. And at 4 months, I was able to get off some of the medications I took. A lot of the medications I took had to do with blood flow, getting blood flow to the brain. I used to have all of these things called pot seizures, where you just didn't get enough blood to the brain, so your body would kind of throw you on the floor. And those all stopped around the 4-month mark, I want to say. By month 6, though, I felt really good. And by the end of the year, I was in full remission, off all medications and all that kind of thing. So I think that was pretty quick for how severely ill I was. Yeah. So yeah, it was a great diet.
And then you just sort of had a random path back to where you're at right now. Do you still change things a lot? Or you sort of have this is what's worked for me, and if I deviate from that, I get sick again? Or you're solid now and you can...
Oh, it's wonderful. I'm really solid now. I mean, I'm 8 years, 8 years out from going into remission. And for many years, I didn't mess with it. I didn't test it because I was so stinking grateful to not be sick. I didn't want to mess with the thing. But no, after that, then, I was working with so many patients and teaching all these different diets. And so I wanted to really know those diets well before I taught them, not just intellectually, but actually having gone through them. So I would do those and things like that. I've been really lucky, and then I haven't had any of it come back. And even if, like, when I'm in France, I'll eat the French bread or the croissants, the properly fermented stuff, for 3 days. I don't do it a lot, and usually I'll do it on a day or two, that kind of thing. But the bulk of my diet is still pretty much the same. But No, I don't have to be rigid anymore. I'm probably really rigid according to what other people are used to. Sometimes I forget how people eat and how I grew up, but I cook so much, and I live in all these traditional places, and I'm traveling to all these traditional places, so I'm eating quite traditional food. But yeah, when I do have something else, like let's say I'm taking a cooking class in Sicily, and so I'll eat the food then. I have zero, and I mean that could change at any point. I'm not yeah, I don't want to pretend like I'm superhuman or anything like that, but I've been really lucky in that I have zero food reactions. In fact, the GAPS diet even reversed a longstanding dairy allergy that I had had growing up, and did so quickly in about a month. I just had a patient reverse, gosh, how many was it? 6 anaphylactic allergies, if you can
Wow.
believe it. Yeah, really incredible. Yeah, so that was really good. I don't react to gluten or anything else, but I eat this way out of both habit and choice. I love how I feel. I love the mental clarity. I love the energy. I love the lack of cravings. I love the ease. I mean, today it's 7:30 here. I got home at 5, and we went to the beach to go for a cold swim, and got home, cooked up some food, ate. Hadn't eaten before that. Probably won't eat again. And yet I'm not hungry. I'm not in that state of desire. And I don't know about you, but that feeling of freedom when your blood sugar is really stable, there's just a few things I would trade for that.
So after the GAPS diet, was it sort of just a real foods based thing? Was it more animal based, plant based?
Oh, it's very animal based. Yeah. So the GAPS diet, there's probably 100 different varieties of it, but the one common thread is zero starch. There's very specific foods you can eat for the different bacterial families. I was always on the ketogenic route, having had seizures with my illness. So, and I had learned long before that I felt very good low carb. So I stayed ketogenic, long term. I've really been in ketosis for the bulk of the last maybe 10 or more years. Yeah.
Interesting. So when you go to these different spots and see all these people eating these different diets, what are some of the things that have stuck out the most to you?
I think I was the most shocked by Japan, I would say, and how similar it was to France in the macros of what they eat. They eat mostly, from what I can tell, meat and starch. They don't eat many vegetables at all.
Yeah.
And I found that in France as well. I did not see a lot of vegetables on any of my trips that I've gone. They seem to do the least amount of vegetables. I would say they tend to have their meat, their fish, their duck, that kind of thing, and then their starch to soak up the sauce. And Japan was very similar to that. And so that's probably been the most shocking, because before that, I really, obviously I knew people ate starch culturally and traditionally, but I didn't realize the lack of vegetation in so many cultures.
Yeah. So, I mean, as far as, like a carnivore diet, something like that goes, pretty animal heavy. And a lot of people, I mean, one of the things that I've mentioned in, actually talked to Paul quite a lot about, is that if people eat a carnivore diet, which is great, it can be a great tool. I think that all these different, you said you use 41 different diets, something ridiculous. It's like each one is just a tool in the toolbox, in my opinion. And you always have to sort of tinker and figure out what works best for you. But the carnivore diet, I hear a lot of these stories where people feel amazing. Then if they add in a leaf of spinach, then their health goes to hell. And I would argue at that point that people then are actually not healthy. They're just covering up maybe for some latent, pathophysiology that they're not experiencing when they're not eating vegetables. So I'm just curious, as far as have you worked with many people who, they go in a really restrictive diet and then try to add stuff back in? What is your opinion on that, as far as the ability to eat starch, to eat vegetables and things like that, and not have a full health breakdown?
Yeah, I think there's two things. So the more sick someone is, usually the more strict they have to go. And the carnivore diet is an amazing tool. I use it with all my schizophrenics. I use it with my histamine and MCAD clients and those kind of things. I find it's usually one of two things. One is that they're just still in that microbiome shift and they're not ready for the fiber yet, right? Because fiber is really neutral. It's fantastic if our microbiome is healthy, but it can be deleterious if our microbiome is imbalanced. And those people are usually dealing with a very imbalanced microbiome. The other thing is too, that people need to remember that the body is very efficient. So we need to produce a lot of different enzymes to eat these different kinds of foods. And if we haven't been eating that kind of food in, say, 3 months, a year, 2 years, and then we go and eat it, the body's not going to be producing enzymes for that for a few days. And so when you try something new, let's say you're having butter lettuce or spinach or something like that, and you've been on a zero fiber diet, so just carnivore, your body's not going to be producing the amylase, the enzyme out of your salivatory gland, to break down that carbohydrate, most likely, unless you had dairy on the diet. And so you're going to have digestive issues. But if you give it a few days and you eat small amounts for a few days, usually by day 4, you're perfectly fine to break that down and you're good to go. But there are cases where it's just a matter of time. They just need to wait a bit longer too.
Yeah. And so, I mean, the way I sort of think about health and people having illness, things like this, is same I would think about physical injury, where, for instance, if you're walking around and you trip off of a curb and you sprain your ankle, that can sort of get better on its own if you have a natural environment. If you keep pounding that ankle into a twisted position, like you're not going to heal. And I think for some people, just being able to eat if people switch to a paleo-ish diet, carnivore, vegan, I don't really care like around the spectrum. I think that obviously some animal foods are an absolute necessity, but when people eat real food, just especially focusing on local food, I think that there's a subset of people that can, with that environment, be just fine because they've sort of deviated from the norm of health. It's only a little bit. And there's other people who they trip off the same curb, they maybe break their ankle, or they trip off the curb and get run over by a bus. You're going to need some very intense intervention at that point. And do you have in your working with patients a sort of a line where you say, okay, this person is fine, just, here's this prescription of, nutrition stuff like we just talked about. And then you saying more about meditation, sunlight, sleep, etc. This person, if they just fix a lot of their environmental habits, they can get better versus ones that need a little bit more of a hands-on approach.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. There's whole different levels. And some people can get away with something very, very light. I think about my family. I come from a really healthy family, and they're great. They're fine eating starches and carbohydrates. And I was too, honestly, until I had all those antibiotics with my illness. They didn't know what it was. So they just pummeled me with antibiotics for a couple of years. And that changed everything. And you see that generationally and culturally as well. I think if we're looking at the microbiome in terms of health of individuals and things like that, I think you can really see it in groups of people. So for instance, if you take, say, people coming from France, especially aristocratic upper class French, they've been eating carbohydrates for a very long time and higher carb foods. And so their microbiomes, if they haven't been tampered with, if they're not coming from moms who had a lot of antibiotics, if they weren't born by C-sections and these kind of things, and they've been pretty healthy, they're most likely not going to get the diabetes and the chronic illnesses that you tend to see in the high carbohydrate modern diets, right? Whereas if someone is from the same background, but has had a lot of antibiotics, that all goes out the door. It's completely different. And so what I've found working with individuals is that you can tell a lot from their history about what their healing trajectory is going to be like and how quickly it's going to work for someone. Obviously, you can never give them a timeline, or at least it would be a bad idea because things can change as you get in there. But for instance, if someone was born in the way I was saying, so like natural birth, nursed, no antibiotics or very little antibiotics, family is healthy, and mentally healthy as well, that person, if they get ill with something, they tend to have a better recovery. I really think that was part of mine. I come from healthy stock. So even though I was so ill, I think I had a bit of a leg up in returning to health. Whereas if someone was born, they have pandas as a kid, they're getting ear tubes, they're on antacids and all these kinds of things, allergies as they grow up, that's a very different person to work with than someone who is healthy. And so different protocols are needed at different levels. And the way I take it, I'm from the Midwest where people don't do these kind of diets and these kind of things, at least not traditionally. So I'm not from like the cool natural backgrounds that so many people are around the rest of the States. And so I have that kind of backdrop or mentality of like, let's get everybody back to normal life, if they want to. And so usually my goal when working with people is not to put them on a lifelong diet, but to get them to a place where they have the choice in what they're eating, right? Kind of like where I'm at now. I could go back and eat Pop-Tarts, but I don't actually desire them anymore. Your desires change as you go through this process.
Yeah, I think a sad point that a lot of people don't want to admit is that a lot of health, people think about it as just genetic. Like, I don't have a choice. My parents don't have a choice. It's just purely genetic. Whereas I think a lot of it is actually passed down environmentally.
Completely.
So like you're saying, if, there's, microbiome disruptions, that could actually be not a genetic thing, but an environmental thing that was passed on.
Completely. And then you've got to remember it's lifestyle too, because here you all are typically families are sitting at the same table, eating the same foods as that child grows up. And so you're constantly reinforcing that bacteria by what you're eating and by who you're surrounded by and what your lifestyle is like. So if you have sedentary parents who like to watch a lot of TV and order out and do restaurant food or junk food, these kind of things, and you guys did antibiotics a lot, it's not going to be a great microbiome. Those genes are probably going to express in the way that everyone is afraid they will. But if that same genetic pool, let's say some cousins, live a completely different lifestyle, they eat at home every night, they have a relaxed home environment, and they haven't had a lot of antibiotics, birth was natural, you get a totally different picture with that same gene pool. And that's part of why I'm doing the work I am, because you can really see that when you go and study these tribes throughout the world. So like when we go to Africa, you'll see the tribes or the cultures that are eating their traditional way, that haven't adapted the rice, the corn, the modern foods, are in literally perfect health. They don't get malaria. They don't get all the terrible conditions like African sleeping sickness. It's us that get those things when we go and travel. We're more vulnerable, right? But the second they start adopting the modern foods, that perfect health declines rapidly. And it does so in the first and second generation. Weston A. Price's work, I'm sure you've gone over that, is really amazing in that. But I think we need more voices of that currently, especially with all the nutritional advice being given.
Yeah, absolutely. So when somebody, let's say, has or born with a terrible gut microbiome, has terrible environment growing up, blasted with antibiotics their entire life, do they really have much of a shot to rebuild to what, some of these tribes you're talking about that are in perfect health? Or somebody
I don't know.
representation?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if they could get back to perfect health. I think they could get back to really good health where they feel really good. But there are bacteria that we require from our mothers. And this will be really, it'll be an interesting experience to see over the next few generations, especially in America and Europe, where we tend to be more antibiotic heavy. What happens generationally? Like I see kids in my practice now who have like pandas, for instance, which is just strep. When you and I were kids, we would get strep and then you'd be fine. For them, it's going to their nervous system and causing all these issues. So they don't have the same resiliency, and we don't know enough about the microbiome yet to say. But I don't believe in anything terrible. I think the human body is so miraculous. I'll tell you what. Yeah, I think it's not hopeless for anyone to heal at all, aside from if you were truly born with something like Tay-Sachs. I don't know if the kind of stuff we do would help that. I have no idea. But I'll tell you what, today, so I almost never go to the doctors anymore. I feel like I did my time on that in my 20s and I am good. But I went for my woman's wellness. I hadn't done it in years. And I was like, okay, I'll just go take care of it. And it was such an incredible experience today. I was really moved earlier because when I was ill, I had all of these cysts on my ovaries and endometriosis just growing everywhere. And at the time, the doctors, I was in my young 20s at this point, they, because I was so sick, they just wanted to pull everything out, uterus, ovaries, all that kind of stuff. And my mom, thank God for her, she put her foot down. I was all for it because I was miserable. I was like, take it, get rid of whatever. But she put her foot down, and I'm so grateful because today, and I guess, I don't know why it was so moving, but today I saw my ultrasound, my ovaries were just like gorgeous and my uterus was gorgeous and I had no endometriosis and no PCOS and none of this kind of stuff. And it just goes to it really reinforces how incredibly magical the human body is and how intelligent it is at repairing itself. When it's given the right things, you can completely turn your health situation around. So yeah, I don't think anything is hopeless, but it's going to be a much harder road for someone who is not from healthy stock. That's for sure.
I'm just curious of so many of these things that are missing, like you said, you need to get some from your mother, et cetera. Do we normalize fecal matter transplants at some point? Does that become something where like we can speed people up? I mean, the research there is astounding. So there's just like, yeah, it's just, I don't think we have a lot of the tools. I think we're just so used to chronic disease the way it is. And, some of the things you're talking about, endometriosis, PCOS are things that most women go to a doctor right now and they say, oh, this is just how you are. And for whatever reason, this is how we're going to manage it. And this is not how we're going to get better.
Yes. And it's so sad because that's actually a really quick one to reverse. It's usually 6 weeks. Those two are really easy and quick to reverse. But yeah, I think
on those ones.
What's that?
So what are your protocols with those?
With those, we go after the insulin, right? Because the ovaries have thousands of insulin receptors on them. You wouldn't think the ovaries had anything to do with insulin, but they actually have a lot to do with it. And if they sense too much insulin in the body, they start shooting out male hormones, androgens, and these kind of things, which are associated with those two conditions. Mainly because the ovaries are sensing a time when it's not good to get pregnant. So they're trying to shut that down. So what you want to do first is balance your insulin and your blood sugar levels. So I get them eating. I usually bring them into ketosis. I bring them into a short eating window to get at the insulin because insulin spikes regardless of what diet you do, however often you eat. So the less often you eat, the less insulin spikes.
Are you
and then
hyper or hypoglycemia with these people from the get-go?
I see both. I usually see hyper with reactive hypo. So they go really low very quickly. Yeah. And so they think they have to snack all the time and eat frequently and that kind of thing. And then we do a couple of herbs. Usually, raspberry leaf and Vitex will shut those off. And that's like $2 worth of tea that you do for about 6 weeks. It's a very inexpensive and quick condition, usually to reverse, that can be really quite debilitating and awful for people. So yeah, I love working with that one.
Yeah. I mean, this is a question I get all the time because I think that a lot of women are now trying ketogenic diets for both of these conditions. So maybe I'll point them to your work and tell them to get the raspberry leaf tea as well.
Yeah. And Vitex. Those two are magical. Inositol is really good as well. And benfotiamine, but yeah, usually it's those herbs.
Sorry, that little tangent, but yeah, I mean, the chronic disease and what we've normalized is insane.
Yes.
And like you said, we go to some of these other places. And what question I want to ask you too is just when you're going to all of these spots, is chronic disease normal anywhere else? Do people even consider it a way to die, for example?
Do you know how it is so abnormal? Even in Greece, I have to say, which Greece, it doesn't necessarily look super healthy. They don't have like these Greek god bodies anymore. They've adopted the potato and they eat a lot of fries, but they have still maintained their health. I mean, today when I went swimming, it's cold here. Well, cold. It's like 55, 60 degrees. So usually people wouldn't go swimming in that kind of weather, but you go to the beach here in Greece and everybody's swimming. Everyone's going out and it's all the oldies. They'll be like 80s and 90 years old out for their like hour-long swim for the day. They go walking. You can't have wheelchairs here. You can't be disabled here. The sidewalks are a mess. It looks like there was an earthquake. So you can really see simply just in the city structure how little disability there is in a place like this. And you see that kind of around the world. I saw the shift mostly in the States. I don't know about you. I would say really sharply around the 2000s. I noticed when I was younger, and maybe it was just because of my interests and how they changed, how if you buy a yellow car, you suddenly see yellow cars. So I don't know if that's coming into play, but I feel like around 2000, 2010, that's when everyone started talking about their illnesses and everybody seemed to have something. But yeah, that's not actually normal in the rest of the world at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so strange how COVID comes and we're so obsessed with saying, okay, here's this one way people are dying right now. I'm not trying to minimize infectious disease or anything, but we say obsess about, okay, we're going to take these most extreme measures to stop this. Yet in the top 10 causes of dying, we've normalized all these diseases that literally didn't exist 200 years ago. And there's no focus on them.
Yes. And we could actually be getting at all of them right now. Like we could really take this time and completely change the health of our nation if some just easy advice was given publicly. But it's not. And so, yeah.
Do you think that there's a general common thread that if you were to wave your wand and say, if we could change all of this, here's the common thread that I want to address? Is it?
Yes. As far as viruses go, I would want everyone on a low arginine diet.
Or
What's
just,
that?
yeah, just regular, like wiping out chronic disease, for example.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have a bit of a personal mission in that. So I'm studying all these longevity cultures, but I don't actually care about longevity. That's not why I'm there. Having been so sick before, I'm very acutely aware of the fact that how you feel in this moment is what's actually important. It's not
Right.
how many years you have. And so I think what I would want to share with everyone is that lifestyle impacts your health so much. And the way that we are living in the States, I would say is really harming us. That goes into our diet as well, because we've lost so many of our traditional threadings to diet. And that is something that's very different in America, right? And if you think about it, it makes sense, because one of the best things about America is that it's a nation of inventors, right? And entrepreneurs. So it's a place where you can safely be very creative and you can create lots of things. Not all cultures are like that. A lot of cultures are very traditional. And in those traditional cultures, you don't tend to lose the cooking and the lifestyle habits. So like in Greece here, everyone takes a nap at 2 p.m. It is a sin to make noise after 2 p.m. here. Between 2 and 5, you will get a ticket. It is a problem, and everyone will yell at you. The neighbors will come down and these kind of things. So their lifestyle has really held force, but also their diet. I go over to my partner, he's Greek, in his aunt's house, and she'll be making the traditional Greek French soup with the whole fish. They eat nose to tail at each meal. It's normal to have the organ meats on a regular basis. They make their own cheese. They go and harvest their own salt. These are all just normal things. And here I am in the center of Athens, which is the second biggest city in Europe. So you would think it would be very cosmopolitan, and these kind of things, but they still do all their traditional ferments and eating the whole lamb on the stick and that kind of thing. And that's what we don't have in America, with our benefit of being a modern kind of anything goes, and therefore great for creation. We don't have the tie to traditional culture. And so we don't have that balancing act. And I think that's really hurt our health quite a bit.
Interesting. So when you're going to check out some of these different countries,
Mm-hmm.
and you're looking, okay, I want to go here, I want to go there. Are you listing it out top to bottom, like here are the most healthy places and I want to go see what's going on with them, and here are the parameters that I want to check? Or is it more just whatever you're curious about?
No, I go based on my curiosity, honestly, and also where I am too. So a lot of times I'll be in one country and I'll be like, oh, actually, it would be really easy to hop over to this one next, and then I could go get this one and this. So it's more based on that, more spontaneity, I would say.
And are you looking for any patterns beyond like nutrition and lifestyle, or is it just you're there and you observe and you see whatever dots you connect?
Yeah, mostly seeing the dots, because I watch a lot of travel channels on YouTube. I don't have access to TV or anything, but I'll watch little snippets of those, and they miss a lot. They miss a lot on terms of what that means for the health of the people and how that impacts them, or how that saves their health and these kind of things. And so I'll often get interested in some of those, or I'll see something interesting someone is doing and be like, I could bring a totally different angle to this from the health field. And so I want to jump over there. Like I'm fascinated by the pygmies. They live right next to the tallest tribe in the world, and they're the shortest tribe in the world. I'm totally fascinated by them, and they eat similarly but differently, and these kind of things. And so I'll get little interests and go based on that.
Interesting. How are you documenting all this stuff?
Film, although I'm just now cutting it up. So I have years worth of film and I'm starting to cut it up. And then also I'm very organized. I've got that kind of like scientific organization going. I always have since I was a kid. And so I track kind of everything I'm doing as well. With Africa and places that are truly unique, I bring blood tests and those kind of things to test how people are, if they're in ketosis, that kind of thing. And then other places are simply observational.
Are you going to make a documentary or something, or is it just going to go on YouTube? How are you thinking about sharing the information?
Probably. Yeah. I'm putting little things on YouTube. I just started a YouTube channel. It's just been a passion project. It was, I was sitting down. I have the most magical life. I have a really wonderful life. And I had this wonderful life a few years ago when I was living in Eugene, Oregon with my brick and mortar. And I don't think I could have been happier. I had this wonderful home and these great dogs and this wonderful practice, good group of friends, like really big group of friends, and really great relationship with my family. And I was thinking one night about, like, I was trying to remember what it was like to be bedbound. And, at that time, I really never thought I'd get a second chance at life, like really did not think on any wavelength. And I was thinking about the things that I wanted to do the most. And the biggest one was to go see the world. I was always interested in National Geographic as a kid, and I was a bit of a tomboy. I like to be in the mountains and roughing it and that kind of thing. And so I was like, you know what? I kind of took the same attitude as I did with healing. Like, nobody's going to do this for me. I'm going to design my life around my goals. I want to go see these places. I want to go study with these people. I want to, learning about the Maasai changed my life. And honestly, I would say led to my healing because I wasn't eating meat for so many years until I learned about them. And so I was like, I want to go share a meal with them and those kind of things. And so I kind of put together this big bucket list, and I did something which was really kind of scary and a bit ballsy at the time, which was just close my brick and mortar. And I didn't know if that would close my practice or if people would adapt to me being long distance or not, but they were really great. So they stuck with me, which was really nice, and stuck with me while I was figuring out time zones and all of that, and kind of packed a suitcase and sold my house and went.
Wow. Big shift.
Yeah.
What's funny is that I actually had a trip planned this summer to be in Europe and definitely basically doing the same thing.
Amazing.
And I was supposed to leave in May, but we all know what happened.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I at the beginning of the year, I was thinking the same thing. Got some solitude time last December, and I was like, how do we want my life to actually look? And it was far different than it is today, but it's because of all the lockdown stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's sort of the same thing of just, I think people's environment shapes so much of their perspective. And I've been so interested in ancestral health and things like that for such a long period of time that I was like, just same as you, I'm going to put myself in that environment all the time. And I mean, this is why I just got a farm here in Texas. I don't know when we'll be able to travel again. So I said, screw it, I'm going to make my environment different here. And I want to be around an ecosystem that works and has a lot of animals and life and death and all these things to remind me of this. And, I'm super excited. I don't think I've actually said anything publicly yet, but we are going to be going to Africa.
Yes.
So Brian set this whole thing up, which is, it's just incredible. And yeah, I mean, I think talking about that a little bit would be really interesting for people as well. Just like, you've been there a bunch of times. What is that going to look like? What's going on? I still don't even know the details, but I'm super excited.
Sure. Yeah, no, happy to. First, I got to say about your farm, though, are you guys going to get any sheep? Do you know?
Yes, I think so.
If I could encourage you to do one, if you eat dairy, sheep butter and cream is the best in the entire world. Like, I live on it here in Greece, and I highly recommend you get some sheep and enjoy that dairy.
I've never had any sheep. I've had sheep cheese, but not any cream or anything like that.
You are ready for a treat. You know, the sheep are really picky, that you can't feed them anything but the wild greens. And so their fatty acid profile is amazing, but that really comes out in the taste of the product. And honestly, the cream and the butter, you've just never had anything as good. So treat yourself to that. Okay. Africa. So with Africa, we're going to spend a couple of weeks in Tanzania. We're going to start with most likely a little homestay. Homestays are where you can stay with people living just kind of like people take you in, not quite a bed and breakfast. It's not formal. It's pretty casual, but we're probably going to do that with either the Maasai in the beginning or the Chaga tribe to begin with, while everyone is landing and coming in from their different places. So it'll be you, I, Dr. Paul Saladino, and Brian Sanders, and Jay, his filmographer and my partner. So it'll be the 6 of us. And as everyone gets in, I already set up a homestay with the Chaga, but with us moving dates, I might shift that to later, because I think Brian is the most excited about the Maasai. Anyway, once everybody's on the ground and adjusted to the time, we're going to jump out on an 8-day cultural safari, which I've had personally designed for us, where we're going to go see at least 5 different tribes eating their traditional diets. We're going to get to go hunting, which I'm very excited about, and meet with some of the medicine folks who can train us in the different herbs and that kind of thing. We're going to do the hunting and the cooking as well with all these different tribes. And we're going to see the genuine ones. So this isn't an easy thing to arrange, I've got to say, because usually they take you to the tourist ones, which are kind of like set up tribal villages that mimic the way that they used to live, but we're going to the real deal, which will be really nice. And then we're going to flip that with the more modern version so that we can really eyewitness and see the difference between the health of people eating their traditional diets on these 5 different tribes, and then when they introduce corn and maize and these very small things, because that's really a very modest addition. It's not donuts and Pop-Tarts and all of this kind of things, and yet you see the drastic change in their health. I've arranged, and hopefully all this works out, I've arranged a council of elders to meet with us from several of the tribes, the traditional tribes, and they're going to talk to us about their experience of seeing the generational decline in the health of people that leave the tribe and go towards the modern diet and the cities and these kind of things. So it should be a really rich experience. After that, we're going to go stay with a modern Maasai. So that's the Maasai that eats the corn and that kind of thing, but still has ties to the traditional. And so we'll get to meet their family and cook with them and do all those kind of things. At the end of the trip, we have it open. So I think we can probably decide based on it. I would love to hike Mount Kilimanjaro. That's about an 8-day trek, but we could do a day trek as well. There's a wonderful waterfall that we can go to. I'm excited to see the Chaga tribe, honestly. I mean, they eat, they're a plantain and meat eating tribe. So they do the meat and the starch, which a lot of the tribes in Tanzania are just meat. It really varies, but they have coffee and plantain farms by this beautiful waterfall that you can go swimming in and you can go rafting in and that kind of thing. And then, of course, there's Zanzibar, which we can go to if there's time. And I think probably with coronavirus, we'll probably play this part by ear, but it's an island off of Tanzania that's very easy to get to. And there's a number of tribes that live there that do wild seaweed harvesting, and there's traditional healers that are really world famous. They're mainly because it has always been a huge part of the spice trade. And so it's a really interesting kind of cultural immersion to go to Zanzibar. But the bulk of our time is going to be spent with the tribes.
Exciting. So
yeah.
How did you get so good at organizing all this stuff? And when you go to all these different places, having sort of the into the actual traditional cultures, whether it be in Europe or Asia or Africa?
You know what? I think nothing excites me as much as looking at a map and planning a trip. Like literally nothing. I get really juiced, like some people do, probably taking drugs. And so I've always done it. I did it for my family when I was growing up, and I do it now. And I just put the time in, and it's really exciting for me. It's probably like someone who likes to knit. I don't know. But anyway, luckily from it, you learn a lot. The more you do this, the more you learn about like who to contact and how to find a good contact and that kind of thing. And then you're able to network. Like I know some really incredible guides throughout sub-Saharan Africa, and they were able to connect me with some people in Tanzania to set this up and that kind of thing. And so, yeah, I spend a ridiculous amount of time on it. I mean, I've probably spent hundreds of hours organizing this trip.
Way to get better. So, I mean, you're talking about the intro of corn and some of these other things and how it's ravaging the health. I'm sure that's what we'll find when we go there. Curious what your thought is on introduction of foods that haven't been there. So for example, like tomatoes in Italy, people, this is an example people give of like, it's actually a South American thing that was brought over and then took over. Do you think that the corn, do you think that tomatoes in Italy are a bad thing for the people there, the Mediterranean? And yeah, we'll just start there and then we'll.
Okay. Yeah, I really do. The problem is that they tend to eat a lot of lectin-rich foods. And when you mix in the solanine is the toxin that's found, one of the plant toxins that's found in the nightshade tomato family. With the lectin, it's a bit insidious because it allows the lectin to stay in the body far longer than it ever would before. Our body can handle these small little plant toxins if they're given seasonally or in small amounts, but the amounts that they're eaten are more problematic. Now, the tomato in Italy for the longest time wasn't as much of a problem. It's only been eaten there for about 150 years, 200 years or so. And they would remove the peel and then cook it for about 72 hours, which removes a lot of the lectins. You still have the solanine, but the lectins removed. That in line with a really traditional diet with no other change, you're not going to see too many problems. But with the modern foods brought in addition to the tomatoes, you're seeing real problems. I would say the healthiest people are the old men. And I think it's because they're the rebellions. They're at the corners eating all the organ meats and all the fats that all of the women are telling them not to eat, because we've all been told that cholesterol is bad for us. And so the women are kind of like chewing their ears off, and they're like sneaking away to eat this tasty bit. And I think that's actually keeping them alive, because Italy has some of the longest lifespan for men, which is rare in traditional cultures. Usually women live longer. But of course, that's all changing. And you really see that. You saw that with coronavirus coming in. I mean, it just wiped the men out, especially in the northern parts. But I think that may have been partly due to statins and things like that, and lowering the cholesterol, since that's our antiviral. But yeah, I think really the biggest problem that's been ancestrally in the last 500 years, as far as our health goes, when our health really went downhill, was the bringing in of foods from cultures that we didn't understand. So like when we brought corn in from South America, we lost the knowledge of how to process that corn through those 5 stages that it really has to go through if you're going to eat it. And so we're eating it without doing that. And that's creating a lot of health issues, especially over time, because again, these are small toxins, but they bioaccumulate, especially in the fat cells and these kind of things. And then they cause, or deficiencies, like the corn will cause a lot of niacin deficiencies if it's not processed correctly.
Interesting. So do you think there's a large genetic component to this stuff as well? You talk about the variety of diets people eat around the world. You know, we have some blue zone stuff that's highly debatable, whether that's important or
Usually.
not. But
Yes. Yeah, I just did a video on that. No, I don't think it's genetic at all, actually. I think it has to do with your microbiome. I think it's far more important that you eat food where you are, and as opposed to where you're from. So like if you're, say, Japanese, but you're living in France, it would be better to eat a traditional French diet based on what foods are available in each season. Yeah.
So, I mean, just looking at the color of people's skin, like they're obviously their body's adapted to the environment, to the sun and the exposure to the sun and UV. You don't think there's any sort of adaptation on a cellular level to the food availability of the environment?
There's no question there is. I mean, we see that with say really with the Inuits and the Native Americans. When we brought all these carbohydrates into their diet, you see a lot of diabetes and alcoholism, right? Whereas you wouldn't see that in cultures that were already eating those kind of carbohydrates. So there's an epigenetic occurrence that definitely happens. But I think if people eat the healthier foods from the region that they're in, they don't tend to see that problem.
Yeah, and like even amylase being way more active in like Asian cultures than not, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I thought it, yeah, it's interesting to get your point of view of, you know, I mean, I always say like eating local is the best way to get anything. And so if you're somewhere like Tanzania eating corn, like that's shipped across the world, probably shouldn't be eating it. And like that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And also eating the food that's traditionally there. Like, okay, you're in Texas, right? So what food would be growing right now? That's what you should be eating. But then you also want to put an ancestral spin on that as to like, did this food exist here and did humans eat it before 200 years ago? Or is this one of these new superfoods that's being sold that really no one was eating? Yeah, I think you've got to put both into play.
Well, I mean, I think that's where for most people it gets so confusing because they don't have the time to like dig into the stuff. They don't know what was around, what's been changed through genetic selection and has been sort of modified over the last 150 years to be something that's not even close to what it is. I'm sure you've read it, but Joe Robinson's book, is it Wild Food?
No. Oh, yes. Yeah, I've skimmed through it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very dense, but it's just fascinating to hear about all the changes from, you know, what an apple looked like 100 years ago to what it looks like today.
Completely different. Yeah, I do think, you know, when I spent the summer in Ikaria, what I noticed was that although they have adopted the tomato and the potato, and they only in the last 50 years, it's actually more recent for them. They eat so seasonally. They eat the tomatoes for about 3 weeks a year. They don't process it into a sauce to eat year round and that kind of thing. And so for the just lay person out there that doesn't want to learn all the nerdy things about the plant toxins and how long a food has been eaten by humans, and if it's a natural human food, I think just eat it in the season. It's actually very, very ripe, and don't keep it for later seasons. And you're likely, if it is a bad food, to be able to handle it.
Interesting. So does that look like in the wintertime, as you guys are getting there, more animal products and less produce?
Yeah, Greece is pretty carnivore in the winter, especially if you go to the mountain towns. It's a lot of dairy, meat, organ meat. That's pretty much mostly what you see. And then if you're at the coast, it's just going to be like the fish and the cheese. So it gets very carnivore in the winter. In fact, so much so, I was leading a medical retreat here now almost 2 years ago in the spring, and I was all excited to show everyone one of my favorite dishes, which is the horta, the sautéed greens. We went to 30 places and couldn't get it because no one sells that in that time of year. It's only in the summer and the fall. So things are incredibly seasonal here. And you do see that in the traditional cultures.
Yeah, such a spectrum. I mean, you tell somebody to eat healthy in America and they go to, if they're lucky, like a Whole Foods or something like that. And they think that if they're buying something in the outer rim of the grocery store, that they're doing such a good job. And relatively speaking, they are for sure. Mm-hmm. But optimally, probably not. And that's the most unfortunate thing.
Yeah, not optimally. And they could also be contributing to more health issues. I don't know if you saw this when your practice is open, but I find a lot of times almost the healthier someone tries to eat, the worse they can get because they're not aware of these things. So let's say they have arthritis and they start eating a ton of like high lectin and oxalate foods, they can get in a lot more pain from them.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, see these sort of like way more popular 5 to 10 years ago than it is now that I've noticed, but these crazy smoothies where people are putting like tons of every single day or twice a day.
Yes.
Which, I have done myself, but
I fell for that too. Yeah. But it just kills it's really bad idea because you're not removing those toxins and you're having them in concentrated forms and you are having them year round, which is also problematic. Yeah. The smoothies and the juices did not help us. That's for sure.
Yeah. Not me, at least. Your family's from France?
Yeah. Originally. Mm-hmm.
Where in France?
All over, but Paris and some of the border around Germany. A little bit from Spain too. Yeah, my mom is from an old French aristocratic family.
That's exciting. So when you go back there, being as this sort of like where your heritage is, how do you feel eating the traditional foods? Like what is more traditional there?
It's wonderful. Honestly, it's really wonderful. And it's nice now because like I said, I can have those foods now, which is so nice, but it's a lot of like roasts and kind of heavier meats and things like that. Escargot, fish eggs, these kind of things, lots of cheese, a lot of cheese. And then a little bit of 3-day ferment French bread to soak up the sauce. I don't eat the bread every day when I'm there, but I do have it a couple of times and it's nice.
Yeah. This is another thing that I'm always surprised whenever I go to Europe is I get such a reaction to the wheat here, and theirs is not the case. And there's reasons for that, obviously strains, but how they ferment it and go about the actual production of it. I mean, that's why I like France so much is that it has preserved such wisdom in food and has so much pride behind it, but also makes it taste good. And I think that most people think that healthy food, traditional foods actually don't taste good. And France is like the pinnacle of culinary food, in my opinion. Like,
I so agree. I don't know about you. I take a cooking class at least once every time I'm there. And it's so fascinating because I love the French. I love them. Like they have a law about their bread. That's how snobby they are about their bread. So their bread has to be fermented for 3 days or it can't be sold. Can you imagine saying that to bakeries in the States? That just would never fly. But when you do that 3-day ferment, you take that gluten particle from 72 particles per million, 72,000 particles per million, down to about 12 in those 3 days. So you get a totally different end product. It really lowers the plant toxin there and makes it very digestible, which is why I think, people can, my Crohn's and colitis patients go there with no problem.
Yeah, I think you can also only sell on site when you make, right? You can't sell from other bakeries. And the ingredients can only be wheat, water, and salt. Like that.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, just
great law.
Have you got any farms around that area?
France? Yeah, tons. Mm-hmm.
What have you learned there comparatively?
Mostly that they're very particular about the way that their food is produced and very traditional. So they use the traditional breeds of cows to make their cheese, and everything is odd. It's funny because in my practice, I make people gets French butter or Spanish butter because they use the right breed of cow and it's always 100% grass fed. But the package will never say that because that's just normal. there. It would be abnormal for a cow to eat anything but grass, and to be it would be unheard of for it to be in a bin instead of out to pasture. And so that's something that's really quite different. It's just an automatic, well, of course we do this, and of course we use the Guernsey or the Jersey breed and this kind of thing as well. Their cheese making is really next level. The cheese making in Europe across the board is really incredible. In Greece, I know everyone knows about feta, but the Greeks just don't export their cheese, and it's a shame. My first trip here, I had an 11-course meal made out of cheese, and it was incredible. We have a lot of really neat cheeses here. Wow. Yeah, in France, what I loved was that it was a real art. I saw this man making a soft cheese, and it was like he was conducting an orchestra while he was putting this together. And you could tell he had done it his whole life, because he was casually talking with all these old Frenchmen that would come in the morning and like they would bring their dish from their homes, and they would get some of this fresh cheese, and then they would all eat outside and then go back home. But the man who was making it, really, I mean, it was a real art form, what he was doing. And yet at the same time, he could have this casual conversation with like Franck.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so inspiring to see that culture have such an emphasis on food and food quality and production. It's just like the wisdom they don't even know about regarding nutrition of the food and how it should be prepared will stay so much longer in cultures like that than it would elsewhere. And it's just funny that you said before about how Japan and France are actually very similar from the composition of the macronutrient diet, because like you're talking about the craftsmanship of the food there. Also, is the same in Japan. When I visit there, I see the same exact things. Like those two countries remind me very much of each other.
I so agree. Me too. Yes.
So it's just fascinating. Cool. Well, I can just ask you a bunch of random questions all day, but we'll probably wrap it up there. Why don't you give people a little bit of information of where they can find you, new YouTube channel, and everything else?
Sure. So I just started a little fledgling YouTube channel. I'm going to be uploading more of my projects from all the last years. It's just Mary Ruddick, nutritionist. So you can find it really easily there. My personal website is enableyourhealing.com, and you can see all the happenings and all my programs there. And then you can find me on Instagram too at Mary Ruddick CNC.
All right, Mary. Well, thank you for all your work and having such a dream life that other people can be inspired by. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Natural State Podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, I'd really appreciate you heading over to whatever service you're listening to this podcast on, dropping me a 5-star review and your thoughts on the show. This helps us get discovered by more people and spreading the good gospel of health. And if you want to stay plugged into all of my self-health experiments, recent research and books that I'm reading and my interpretations of those things, products that I'm testing, and thoughts on all things related to health, check out my free weekly newsletter called The Feed. You can sign up for that at dranthonygustin.com/thefeed. That's dranthonygustin.com/thefeed. Thanks again for tuning in and your support of the Natural State Podcast.